We are so excited to be partnering up with the Newark Museum. And I'm Andy Green. If you guys don't know who I am already, I am the creator of The Worrywoos, a series of books and plush dolls dedicated to social emotional learning. I will be the moderator today, and we will be bringing you experts to discuss the many questions we have regarding kids' mental health. We will try and answer as many questions as we can as we go through the webinar. You can write them in the chat or the Q&A. So we are going to start with, how kids are doing during the time of COVID. Today we will begin with Divya Dodia. She is a child and family therapist in Jersey City, New Jersey. She created the Kindness Project for the Jersey City school systems. You can learn more about Divya at divyadodia.com. Hi, Divya. How are you doing today?
Hey, Andy. I'm good. How are you?
Good. It's great to see you. So let's get started. We know that identifying emotions is the first step to social emotional learning. Many of the emotions that have been circulating around us have been grief, fear, frustration, anxiety. It's been a lot. Let's start with the big picture, the epic loss a lot of our kids are feeling right now. The loss of a classroom, socializing with their friends, not seeing their family members. The list just goes on and on. Can you give us a little insight into the concepts of grief and loss and how it's impacting our kids?
So grief and loss, Andy, are one of the hardest emotions to process because there are so many underlying emotions that come with it: disappointment, anger, disgruntlement, and just pure sadness. And what our kids are going through, it's something that I don't think we're ever going to be able to fully understand in the recent times because pandemic is something new. I think a lot of research has been going on it, but we're not going to know the long-term effects of it. But what you're seeing currently is what I can talk about. The grief and loss of not being in the classroom, not having that physical interaction with their teachers, with their peers, with their grandparents, families not being able to travel, it has a profound impact on kids. And what's that creating is a lot of anxiety. And grief and loss and anxiety tend to go hand in hand. And if you really look at it, our emotions tend to go hand in hand. I mean, we like to take one thing at a time and we want to deal with one thing at a time. But unfortunately, emotions don't work like that. They are all interconnected. Can you feel happiness and sadness at the same time? Absolutely. Some families will tell you, like, I'm so happy that I get to spend all this time with my family. I never had that opportunity because I was working 80 hours a week. But the stress of homeschooling kids is a different kind of stress, right? So with pain, with grief and loss come pain and hurt. And now you're starting to see that with kids. And because kids, each child develops individually, they're experiencing this in a very individualistic way. So there's some kids that, that are in therapy with me, they're happy not having to go to school because school was really tough for them. Mm-hmm. So being home and having that specific attention from a caregiver is actually they're thriving in it versus other kids who have a difficult time being at home. They are not doing well with it. I think parents for the most part are doing a great job in trying to making sure that they're surviving, their kids are surviving, schoolwork is getting done. They are taking them out to the park so that there's at least some social connection that's happening. But unfortunately, some parents who are like our emergency workers and, first-hand responders, they don't necessarily have that luxury to be able to do that on a daily basis. Right. So that's where kids are at home. They are on screens, a lot more than I think any parent would want. But at this point, it's like it's becoming a matter of survival. It's no longer like, what can I do best? And I think a lot of parents, if you talk to them, this is what they're talking about. It's a major loss. It's a loss that they're experiencing on daily basis. And the kids not having contact with their classmates as often, because in classmates, it allows, in a classroom setting, it allows you to form those friendships, those relationships that create those memories. Kids are not able to do that. Think about the loss if we experience, if when we look back, what do? We look back at our memories. We look at, you know, we look at it at a point where it's difficult, you know, in a, for example, in a public school setting, to create those memories because kids are not in class, but they're able to be, you know, still getting that feedback where the virtual sessions are still happening. So that loss and that grief that the kids are experiencing, it gets projected in many different ways, where like a lot of parents are telling me, like, it's impossible for me to get my kid out of the house after they have been like in school for like 8 hours. They don't want to leave the house. Right. They don't even want to go for a walk.
Would you say that's like kind of what I was also going to ask about regression? Like, have you noticed more of this in your conversations? And what would you suggest we could do? Like, how can we be mindful of this and not feel like we're failing our kids? I mean, I know that my kids are, you know, going through regression right now. Like, it's crazy. And it's a big conversation that I've had with a lot of other families.
Yeah, I mean, regression is very common, and it is a response to distress. So anytime adults, kids, they go through distress, they will regress in certain, you know, forms. And some kids, for younger ones, they'll just stress more physically. So the potty training that they have been potty trained, but they're no longer, there's a lot more accidents that are happening, right? You get to see kids who were doing really well with speech therapy, and all of a sudden when regression happens, that's where you start to see, you know, in adults, it's like if you were really good, if you were very good at going to the gym and taking care of yourself, now that you're home, you may not do that anymore. Right. So it's like, and for kids, let's not forget that their behavior is the way to communicate. It's how kids communicate. They don't necessarily have a very, you know, strong language or a complete understanding of what we're feeling. Well, mind you, half the time even I don't have like a complete understanding of what I'm feeling because it's so mumble jumbled. But yes, it is a way of, you know, communicating. So I think what we need to do is, or what will help actually, is if we pay attention to the emotion behind the behavior.
Right. And that also ties back into social emotional learning, right?
Absolutely.
Feelings, making sure we identify these feelings, making sure that the kids are comfortable talking about these feelings, that these feelings are not negative, they're just part of who we are. I mean, those are conversations that, you know, can also stir up even more fear and anxiety, and we need to figure out how to help them relax on that. How do we explain to the kids the fear is real, right? There are real fears, but also help them navigate back where they aren't so, where now we've identified the feeling, but how do we help them navigate back where they're not so scared?
I think first of all, we have to validate the child's feelings, right? We have to validate what's going on. That, you know, and I would say that at each stage, like we were talking about, you know, how kids grow up developmentally, like you have to know your child and see what kind of information you can present to your kids. Right. You know, I know that they've done a great job in trying to come up, like Sesame Street at the very beginning had, you know, explaining coronavirus to kids.
Yeah, that was amazing. Amazing. Yeah.
Right. So there are resources out there that exist, like how, you know, like maybe with your teens. And it also depends on, like, you know, what is your child's temperament? If you know that your child gets anxious very quickly and, you know, is fearful a lot faster than maybe the older sister is, right? So you may want to like look at the language you use, but you also want to see that, like, you know, what kind of information that will be the best for the child and how you're presenting it. But you still have to talk about the basics, right? And the basics is that, yes, it's a pandemic and we don't know when it's going to end. I mean, those are the facts that like nobody could dispute at this point.
Right. And like, so the conversation stirs up anxiety in ourselves as well, right? It triggers it both. How do we help our kids? How do we call some of the triggers in us so it doesn't translate to the kids? I mean, definitely, I know when I feel anxious, my kids can see it, and I'm sure that they are also feeling that in themselves. How would you suggest, what are some thoughts on that? And have you heard a lot of conversations in that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think a lot of times as parents, we feel anxious about a lot of things. I mean, families that have been so much impacted by this, right? Like people who have lost their jobs, people who have to stand in food pantry to get their stuff, just to make the next meal. They don't know when the next, like, what else is going to happen. People who have lost their jobs, their homes. So of course those families and any person who's walking by who believes in this pandemic is feeling the stress.
Right.
I think more of it comes from Andy, like, can you recognize your own triggers? Do you understand? Like, if you are starting to feel extremely irritable, you're starting to feel like, you're not even taking a full breath, right?
Right.
You feel like, all of a sudden there's been a huge change in your sleep. There's been a huge change in your appetite. I mean, a lot of times with stress, we will have the physical symptomology first before our brain actually recognizes like what's happening. So once we start to do that, then we have to first take care of ourselves, right? Put your oxygen mask on first before you give it to someone else, right? And yes, our behavior, the way we model our behavior and our emotions, that's what our kids are learning. That's what's forming the blueprint in their minds of, well, this is a stressful situation. This is how I'm supposed to react, right? We know that, one of the things that had come out in recent Harvard study was, the consumption of alcohol has increased quite a lot.
Right. Yeah. It's a huge
right?
conversation. Absolutely.
Yeah. So whoever invested in wineries is doing really well at this point, right?
Very
I should have done that.
There's something to be said, right? We are all trying to find ways to calm ourselves down, and that can possibly backfire too, correct?
Absolutely. So, and if your child is seeing every single day, your parents are, having drinks and they're talking about like, oh my God, like this is really stressful, then they are going to associate that drinking and stress tends to go together.
Okay.
Right. So it's not only just one thing that the kids are learning. It's multiple things from one situation that they are learning, right? But also at the same time, they see their parents getting up and working out or making sure that on the weekends, like, they're going hiking, or they're just going for walks, or if they hear their parents say, I had a really tough day at work, it was really stressful, but let's go for a walk. Like that's, again, it reinforces, okay, when stressed, we can go for a walk. So it's all like interactional and pretty much for the most part, every step that an adult is taking in front of a child, it's kind of giving them a platform of like how I should be dealing with this. So yes, in order for us to help our kids with anxiety and stress and this grief and loss and this loss of connection, as parents, we have to recognize that we're feeling some of the same. And it's okay for us to talk about it, but again, it has to be in a language that's developmentally appropriate.
Right. And you had mentioned when I talked to you before, we were talking about bullying, right? On top of everything else, we have this virtual learning experience for a lot of us. And for the older kids, the kind of silent conversation is the bullying that's going on that a lot of parents, we don't even know because, we let our kids do the virtual learning. Of course, we trust that the system is going through well. And for teachers, it's so hard. They're managing hybrid, they're managing on in classroom, online. What are your thoughts on that? And has that been a conversation for you? Have you heard more about the bullying situation online?
Yeah, I mean, it's been something that's been coming up more often now. I think before in my practice or at school, like that was one of the biggest reasons I started the kindness and empathy program at PS5 was because I truly believed in changing the culture of the like the environment. Not that there's a lot of bullying going on, or it was presented, but it was just something that I believe in, that that's the foundation of being a human being, is having that empathy and kindness. And it's not just academic success. It's these two components are absolutely necessary for a child to grow up to be a successful individual and function and be a productive member of the society, right? So when we started this program, like you notice that when you're having a conversation with younger kids, it's about feelings. Like that's the foundation, is recognizing that I feel hurt, or my friend was rude to me and I didn't like what they said, right? And teaching kids, basically at a very young age, that intentionally or not intentionally, our behavior has consequences, right? And you build that in other, as you're going to like elementary, and then you go to middle school, and then you're going into high school. Like that's the foundation you continue to build, right? And now, and if you don't have that kindness and empathy, it's because those are things that need to be taught. It's taught through conversations at home. It's taught to behavior. It's taught through, how you're proceeding in life. And kids are constantly seeing and learning, right? Again, so with this virtual learning, hybrid learning, a child may not realize that if I'm chatting with someone on the side and I am using words that are hurtful and I'm constantly talking to the same person right now, because the thing is, the cyberbullying has expanded and it can be done very easily. Whereas when you are physically in school, you may be a little bit more, careful, and you may need people to your group to, strengthen numbers. Whereas in cyberbullying, one person is enough, right? And there's so many other different platforms, especially for older kids now, that social media is blowing up. Like, you've got your TikTok, and you've got your Instagram, and you've got your Facebook. Well, I don't think kids really go on Facebook. That's more for the older people, right? But you have all these different platforms, and if they're not being monitored, right? Like you and I could be in a classroom, and a person can take a picture, maybe because you were scratching your nose or something, and puts it up somewhere, right? On a different platform.
Right.
And it's just like, these things are becoming more common. So when you don't have the foundation of that kindness and empathy, right? Where else would you go with it?
Good. That's a really great point. I also want to mention, we had a comment in the chat regarding homeschooling as an inaccurate term for remote learning. That's absolutely true. Homeschooling is separate.
Oh, that's a completely different program. I meant homeschooling.
I may have actually said okay. Homeschooling accidentally instead, and that is very true. But she made a great point here, saying that regression is also a consequence of the lack of routine, right?
Absolutely.
So that also then can also relate to, like, we have all this energy and we are going through all these different emotions, especially all ages, and that can translate to all different feelings regarding, like, can actually turn into the kids having additional feelings of lacking the routine, right? Because they've lost something and now they're trying to get it back. But sorry, I just wanted to mention that really quick, because that was
it's a great point, and I'm glad that you mentioned it, because I was going to come back to somehow structure and routine and the loss of that, and having to go through a new routine where many kids, because the parents have been working, they have to navigate themselves.
Right, and that's what I was thinking too. It actually almost all goes hand in hand, like the older kids with bullying, having like this element of being home and all these separate channels now and being virtual, as well as losing that routine. So it almost creates this anxiety, and where do we put all this frustration, right? Where do we put all this energy? And it can be extremely a heavy feeling for a lot of us. So for teachers out there who are, I feel so much empathy for the teachers out there who are juggling both the classroom and virtual learning, right? A lot of them are doing remote virtual as well as doing the classroom. How can they be mindful? Like, is there any suggestions you would give them on like being more mindful during this time of loss? Like it can, I'm sure, be for them extremely hard to juggle the two. What would you tell them as they're going through this about how they can kind of, I guess, delve deeper into how the kids are feeling, you know, like how can they be more mindful of the situation?
So Angie, one of the things we have to recognize that the teachers, the kids that they are teaching, they don't know them very well. It's not that they've been teachers like, you know, since kindergarten. So all of a sudden they know this child and, oh my God, like, you know, I'm seeing this kid's used to getting like B pluses and now I'm seeing like they failed half the test, right? So teachers are still getting to know these kids.
Right.
And I think for the most part, teachers have done a beautiful job. I mean, I can speak from my experience, the amount of time, like, you know, I have two girls, you know, in 5th grade and 3rd grade. And I see the time that the teachers are taking in the morning to have conversations, you know, and saying, so tell me about something fun you did. Like, and you know, or some teachers will have actually made a point to say good morning to every child, not just say good morning class, right? So, and they're finding like, you know, tell me the funniest thing you did that, you know, and just making sure that they're getting to know the kids, because in the classroom, it's much easier. You're seeing the whole child, right? Like physically as well. And here you are where you have this much, right? And you're trying to understand this entire child, like with just the face, not the body, not the movement, like, you know.
It's so hard. It's so hard.
Exactly. So I think like the teachers, the fact that like a lot of the school systems, the districts are providing, you know, a lot of like teachers, like really good workshops in kind of making sure that they're, you know, processing their own feelings while they're doing this. Because we have to understand a lot of teachers, like this kind of technology is very new to them. So as they're navigating the technology, as they're figuring out the Google board and the Google Meet and, you know, Zoom, and, you know, they had to, you know, oh, stop talking on the chat, like while they're teaching. I think they're doing the best that they can, but some of the things that may help is to have that close connection when teachers do breakout rooms where they're working with smaller groups. I think it gives them a better sense of getting to know the kids, right? And all the teachers have their own system of doing that. Some teachers do it on daily basis. Some teachers do it on like, you know, like weekly basis, that this week is this group, this week is that group. So I think that the teachers do provide, you know, some sort of a structure to the entire day of the kids and working in small. And this also enhances the kids to have that interaction with each other in a smaller group. Because in big classroom setting, for some kids who already suffer with a lot of like emotional anxiety and social anxiety, just being on screens with like, you know, a lot of kids can be extremely daunting. So when teachers are able to provide, you know, the smaller group settings and group projects, I think they're providing, you know, really a sense of security for the kids too. I think the other part of them, what might be a little bit helpful is getting to know the families as well. And getting, you know, like I know that our teachers had sent out, you know, before school started, like, you know, this like little sheet of paper where you're talking about your child. You're talking about their strengths. You're talking about, you know, what are some of your goals for your children? Like, you know, and I found that to be very helpful because I felt like, okay, at least like it's giving some insight. And, you know, teachers have made it a point to, you know, if you're, to connect with families. And I think that gives parents a lot, you know, some teachers you know, everybody has their own system and you kind of have to know what's going to work for you, because most of the teachers also have their own children that they are virtually learning, that they have to attend to as they're teaching. So being mindful of that as well. And I think patience on both part is how we're going to get through this.
So do you feel that there's going to be a lot of talk of separation anxiety when kids do start to go back to school? Like, do you have, I mean, we're talking about now everybody not wanting to leave the house, right? Our kids have gotten so used to being home. I mean, it's hard to say at this point, but do you feel that the separation anxiety, you're already seeing a conversation about that? Because we talked about social anxiety, right? So social anxiety, then I would think would also pair with separation anxiety in some respects. Is that kind of true, or is that?
Yeah, I think again, it comes down to the development, right? And each individual child, as masses, I don't know, because I don't know much studies have been done on like what this is looking like, right? Because in some of the school districts, they went to school and then everything shut down again. And I think that's like a little bit more traumatic for kids than not going, because now there's a routine, there's a schedule. Parents have figured out how to make this work. I think for younger kids, yes, the separation anxiety is going to be definitely a lot higher. Elementary, middle school, I think elementary is a little tricky because, again, elementary and middle school, it's harder to tell because kids are developing so much faster. And, middle school is tough as it is for many kids.
Right. I mean,
so it's so hard to tell, like, what is it going to look like? I always I try not to create these cookie cutters, like this is how it's going to be, because each family, each child is so unique in how they handle it, right? For mainly for high school kids, we have to understand that, their social identification comes from school, right? A big part of how kids socially identify, it's coming from schools, and it's more apparent in high school. So when they're not getting, that interaction with their peers in a school setting, you're starting to see lower identification of themselves, which is, as many articles have said, it's leading more to depression and lower self-esteem, specifically in teens. Right? So for them, is separation anxiety going to be too much? I don't know. They may actually look forward to going back to school.
Right. Probably saying it because I have young kids and I'm starting to think they are definitely like clinging super tight, and I'm already prepping myself for like peeling them off and getting them prepared. And as a parent, like I struggle with preparing them, like I feel like I want them in the cocoon, but I also want them to be ready to go back. But we have a great question here. What are some of the symptoms of depression that we should look for in teens? That's a
Yeah, I'll tell you this, that I used to be, when I first started my training in all of this, in child and family therapy, and I was just like, oh, I'm only going to work. Like, teen used to terrify me.
Really?
Yeah, I was just like, I'm never going to work with teens, but it's my favorite group to work with because I feel that they are just so interesting. I love working with teens. I think they have so much to offer, and we can learn so much from teens. And maybe because I don't have teenagers yet, I'm saying that. When my girls become teenagers, we'll see what I'm saying at that time. Check with me in like about 4 years. So yes, so the signs of depression. Now again, just remember that signs of depression, you have a lot of anxiety. There's a shift in behavior. So either you're going to notice that, the child is withdrawing a lot. Like, teens already like to spend some alone time. Their headphones are on, they're moving about kind of, but there is going to be a certain shift. If you're paying attention to your teen, like, it's how they respond to you. It's in their faces. It's in their body language. If you're noticing, like the appetite has tripled, like, and I know a lot of people will say, well, yeah, teens eat a lot. Well, yeah, they eat a lot, but in depression, it's a different kind of eating that they're doing. Like, they're not eating like huge portions. There's like a lot of gravitation to a lot of junk food and constantly wanting to fill this void with food, right? Like, you have to be careful that there is pain and there is hurt and there is angry outbursts. Like there's withdrawal, there's a lot of lethargy. Like they just don't want to get out of bed. And I mean, it's not like, no, I'm not getting up. It's like there's like silence, and they're not getting out of bed, and they're not necessarily talking to you. They're irritable. There is, now mind you, when I'm saying all of these things, it's to the extreme, right? Because at some point we all know our kids, and we know that like how far they go and how far they push us. So I'm talking about extremes. Like if a whole day, like, if your child is used to sleeping until noon on a Saturday, but it's like this is becoming a pattern that they don't get out of bed like till like 2 or 3 p.m. Like we need to start kind of putting a check mark on it. Like, okay, this is a pattern I'm seeing, right? Not eating. You gotta eat. Nope. And it's, again, a pattern. So these are all patterns. This is not just one-off, right? A lot of like physical symptoms. I don't feel well. I have a headache. I have a stomach ache. Like, we have to be careful, because if your child is usually pretty healthy and once in a while, but now you're seeing that every day it's this, like, they're not like, they're kind of like socially withdrawing. So it's like, they would at least first come and talk to grandparents for 5 minutes. Now it's like you're pulling teeth. I don't want to talk. There's a lot of crying. There's a lot of like outbursts. There's a lot of anger. With teens, it's usually extremes. So that's what we need to look for.
Now we have a good question here. Do you think this affects children with special needs in ways that are unique to this population?
Absolutely. I mean, we haven't even touched the topic of kids with special needs. We talked about
insight in the conversation on this. Like, what have you been hearing? Like, what have you been seeing? And, and what can we do to help? I mean, I know that's a hard question and it might not be an answerable question, but let's go with the first question. Do you think this affects kids with special needs in ways that are unique to the population? Then we'll go from there.
Absolutely. Because we have to understand that, kids with special needs, like, they process emotions as well. They are not indifferent, right? They may not be able to articulate the way that maybe a child with no special needs can, right? So, and I think that parents with special needs kids, like they're so in tune to how their kids are feeling. Like they get it. So does it affect the kids? Absolutely. Like I know one of the biggest struggles that's happening is that kids with special needs, a lot of their therapy is in person. It's hand over hand, it's the hugs, it's helping them, like being next to them and saying to them, okay, this what needs to get done, and we're going to get through this. We're going to do it. And kids are not getting that. Some of the schools did start having the kids with special needs come in. But again, if there is an outbreak, the school is being closed. And, to be very honest, like therapy over Zoom is helpful. I don't know how helpful it is for kids because, like if a child goes under a table because you're talking about something very difficult, right, I can't bring the child out. Like I'm talking and looking for help and versus like when they're in school, that little hug, that holding of hand, can have like a very calming effect on their emotions, which is a big part of therapeutic intervention, right? So when special needs kids are not getting that, or they're unable to get it, it definitely affects their emotional growth.
And so we do have about like a little bit more than about 10 minutes left. So the whole picture, we are talking about kids' mental health and the special needs, definitely the conversation about not getting that, the touch, the interaction. I mean, it's so big. Overall, what are your thoughts on the moving forward with this? How can we better understand this so we can move forward and being mindful of all the situations? I mean, for kids that are going through this, are there any suggestions you would give teachers that are dealing with this that can only do virtual? Is there any tricks up your sleeve that you've done that you felt have worked in conversations through the virtual world? I mean, I know we have talked about how hard virtual counseling is. You've told me that before, and you just said it now. What can we do to kind of just make it a little bit better? Just even a snippet, if there is one. If there is one, it might just be we have to deal with it and move forward. And that's understandable too. I mean, right now we're in a time that's very hard to navigate for all of us.
I think, like, first of all, I want to give hats off to all the teachers and the parents that are going through virtual learning, and just people in general that are going through this, right? And I feel that everybody is trying to do the best that they can in providing the best for their kids. Parents are researching nonstop on, like, what are some activities I can do? Parents are constantly, I think they're reaching out more to therapists, and not maybe necessarily to get therapy, but just conversations just about getting ideas. Like, I know I just get like calls a lot just asking me. They don't need to come to therapy, but it's just like, hey, like, I know you work with kids. Can you just give me some very quick tips in what I can do, right? Like, if it's like a very specific situation, and we call them solution-focused therapy, where I don't need to peel the onion. We can just discuss what will work best for your child, right? I think play. Try to spend as much time as you can playing, building things, messy play, arts and crafts, right? Like, a lot of times, like, I just go outside and sit with my kids, and do chalk, because any way that they can use colors and arts and crafts to express themselves, it's one of the most beautiful ways to do that, right? Talking about their feelings. You don't have to come and sit and say, well, tell me about how you're feeling. It's not about that. It's about, even when you're reading, talking about the character and why do you think the character felt like that? What made character make these choices, right? Playing games, like competitive games or strategy games, like, so that, like, your mind can go somewhere else, but to focus on, I'm stuck at home, right? So there are many different ways, like being silly, using humor, finding something to laugh about. I think this is how we're going to continue to move forward. We need to have a lot of patience, because this is not going anywhere. We're just starting, like, some people say it's second wave, and some people are saying we're still in the first wave.
Right.
So,
well, I would also think that this concepts of arts and being outside is good for us too. Is good for the parent too.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Like, adult coloring is up. Using coloring books and coloring with your kids. And interacting with them, showing them that you're there, that you're present, you're clear and present, putting down the phone and just looking at them and spending that time outside is really valuable for the children, I would think. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't even like baking, and I've never done this much with my kids. Like,
yeah, me too.
Like, I'm tired of baking, but yeah, but it's a way, where we're at a point where I just move back and they do the baking. Now, things don't come out as great, but they don't need to know that. But it's doing something that, again, now you're building different kinds of memories.
Right. And to the teachers out there, right? All the teachers who are watching, this also could apply to them. Doing some arts with the kids, even though it might not be the normal, can also, it's amazing that with the Newark Art, we're here with the Newark Museum of Art, right? Art is such a segue into emotions. I mean, that's what I did. I threw out my feelings. And I feel like that could also help teachers when in a moment when they feel, how can they interact more and discuss emotions more with their kids? Taking the time to bring art into the curriculum, as hard as it may be. I know that there's an art class, but even in the general classroom, it's...
Oh, absolutely. Like, one of my favorite activities is, like, I like to get just plain clay.
Right.
And we mold it. We build things out of it, and we paint it. Right. It's a great way that kids can, again, express themselves, right? So, again, like, keeping in mind that teachers and parents are doing the best that they can, and to also be able to forgive yourself and to be patient with yourself. And it's, you're in it together, and we will get through it. Just acknowledge your own emotions first before you can work through something else of your child's emotion.
That's a beautiful, amazing point, because a lot of us are feeling very negative on ourselves, like we are failing our children. And just remember that, straight from Divya here, you guys are doing a great job. Teachers, parents, we're doing the best that we can in a really hard situation. And there is no right or wrong in a lot of ways. I mean, I've called Divya and been like, I don't know if this is right. And your answer to me is there's no right or wrong. There's no right or wrong. And I think everyone needs to really take that to heart. Now we have 2 more minutes left, Divya. I would love to know if there's anything else, especially if you have any thoughts on the kindness project real quick. Anything, I know.
Sure. I mean, I know that like what we do even now is like our crisis intervention teacher, he pops into classes, they read a book, and they'll do even small like activities, take Post-it notes and leave like really positive message for your family members.
I love that.
And it gives kids, like, they're excited because they're actually talking about a different story and not something from ReadWorks, and they get to do something and they get to apply something like that. So, kindness, it just starts very small and then it grows. That is it. Like, even like if you're giving your kids a lunch, like write them a little note, like have a great afternoon. Or I'm right here for you.
And if they're home, you can even have lunches for them made, right? Pre-made, kind of
Absolutely.
like do the routine of making lunch, having a note in it. And a lot of this stuff is just a simple Post-it note. It doesn't necessitate running to a craft store.
No, not at all.
A lot of things you can do are just straight from home, which is amazing. Because that's the other thing, teachers trying to translate this through a screen, it can be hard if they need to use outside items. So a Post-it note, just a simple Post-it note, or as I say, a ballpoint pen and a piece of paper to draw out your feelings.
Oh yeah, and using like sites like Go Noodle, where on Friday they can just have a dance party, right? Or making sure they're celebrating a kid's birthday by everybody wishing and singing and taking the time, and everybody goes around and say, what do they like about this child? Like, these are just simple activities that can be incorporated.
Right, well, that's amazing. I want to just say thank you so much, Divya. It is always a pleasure to hear you speak, to talk to you, to get information. Everyone, again, I urge you to check out divyadodia.com. And we will be back. We're passing this over to the Newark Museum of Art, and we will see you again for our second set of panelists. So thank you everyone who tuned in now, and we will see you guys all very soon.